All right. Now we're going to go ahead and get started. It's great to have you all. This is DevOps KC. This is our April 2023 first of a two-part series. Hopefully you all didn't think this was the second one, and we're hoping for the next one. That'll be next month. That's how that 1 and 2 works. But yeah, glad to have you. We're going to talk about AI and DevOps, AI and DevOps. Who all here, this is your first time at, hi Mike, this is your first time at DevOps KC. All right, so good, like over half the room. Fantastic. Good. Glad to have you all. This is our, we're starting a string now of getting back into the flow of all this. And I'll put this plug in now. We definitely are looking to, how many of you actually have been to a DevOps KC, DevOps Days KC? Okay, so even less. So that's great. So yeah, glad to have you all here. So we're looking to kind of move into potentially doing a another DevOps KC in 2024. DevOps Days KC 2024 is kind of our plan. We're starting to talk about it. So if you're interested and you kind of get a buzz of what we're doing here, or have been to a DevOps Days and you want to get involved, definitely come see me. And we can talk, get you, register that interest. We're going to start doing some planning and kind of see what it looks like to do that in 2024. So there's that plug. With that, I want to introduce Stephanie from Tech Systems. They're our great hosts. Go ahead and give Stephanie a round of applause. They did space and food, which is great out there. If you haven't had any yet, go grab it. If you're watching online, it was okay. Food good. We're going to try to up our game. Hopefully you'll be able to join us next time for better food. But with that, you want to tell us about Tech Systems and what you do? And
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you guys all for coming. I really appreciate it. When I first saw that the attendee amount was up to... better?
Yes. There you go. There you go.
Hi. I did panic a little when I saw the attendee amount was up to 100 people. I was like, oh my God, how are we going to fit 100 people in this room? But it looks like we do. That's perfect. Close to. So thank you guys all for coming. Tech Systems is a technology solutions industry. We're global. We support multiple different industries, across industry vertical really, for anything you name it. I sit here in Kansas City locally and in Wichita part-time, but I come up here most often, supporting the healthcare market. And then I've got a few of my partners that are around in the office as well. I'm sure you guys will get to network with them afterward. That'll introduce themselves to you and say hi. But we appreciate you guys coming out. Looking forward to hosting more potentially in the future. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Great. Thank you. Another round of applause. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go to a moment where does anybody in the community, in the city, have any kind of announcements that they want to kind of mention around things that are going on, other events, or meetups and such? Ben, you want to kick us off with announcements?
Yeah, if you're interested in the AI conversation, we're doing an all-day event called next5.io. It's going to be all things futurist. So it'll be July 27th, Lower Park Convention Center. If you're interested, like I said, next5.io or find us and I after the meeting.
Cool. So next5.io. Where? Excellent. Who else? Yeah.
May 11th, there's an event called Digital Health KC, hosted by a group called Digital Health KC. It's their kind of initial rollout of the program. So if anybody's in digital health in the development space, it might be a good event to kick off. They're trying to pull together Kansas City's ecosystem around digital health. So obviously we've got a lot of relationships with Cerner and EdSmarts of the world, and really trying to pull those strings together. One of the main topics that we're going to talk about also is workforce development.
Okay. Excellent. And what dates again were that?
May 11th at Boulevard Brewery from 4 to 7.
Great venue. What else could you ask for? Digital health, that means Boulevard Brewery is healthy. Excellent. Not really, but that's what I do. Anyone else? Anyone else have anything to kind of announce, mention? Any meetups you're part of that are coming up on other things in Kansas City? Ben, again.
I forgot again. The AWS user group is having a meeting June 6th. It'll be in Solom hosting. It'll be AI days, so if you're interested in AI,
AWS Meetup, user group Meetup. All right, cool. You said that was June 6th?
Yeah.
Got it. All right. Anything else? Cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and we're going to move into kind of the talk kind of section. Joining us to talk first is going to be Michelle Frost. She's a senior developer over at Crema, based here in Kansas City, and she's deep passion for AI, ML, has done a lot of work in that area, and has a Master's of Science in Artificial Intelligence from Johns Hopkins. So glad to have her. Michelle, want to go ahead and kick us off?
How about that? That's better. Okay. I'm Michelle. I'm a developer. I can be kind of awkward sometimes, so I'm going to preface that right here so that we're all on the same page. Any heckling that you have can be saved for Tim. I don't take that as well. So we're going to be talking about the promise and perils of artificial intelligence. Agenda. This is going to be a very wide but shallow talk. How many people right now are currently in an AI practice on a daily basis? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, so not very many, right? AI is blowing up right now. I know there's a lot of interest and peaked. So what I wanted to do is kind of take a step back, introduce some jargon so that we can all be familiar with them, understand the different types of machine learning, understand the different types of ethics that we need to be talking about, and then how do we move forward. So my goal here for today is for everyone in this room to feel empowered to participate in discussions about AI and be able to contribute to informed decision making coming in the future. So I'm Michelle. That's Wilbur. I don't like including photos of me on there, so you get the dog. As mentioned earlier, by day, I'm a senior developer at Crema. By night, I'm a grad student at Johns Hopkins studying artificial intelligence. So one of the questions that I get asked most often is, how does AI relate to machine learning? How does it relate to deep learning? What are the differences between this? And really, AI is just an umbrella term, and I apologize. I put a lot of content in these slides, and it's going to be hard to see, so we're gonna talk through them together. So AI is a bucket umbrella term. Artificial intelligence has been around for a long time. We're going to talk about the history here in a moment. Encompassing in some classical AI, optimization, state-space search techniques, a lot of fancy if-else that began, classic natural language processing, classic vision, and then machine learning is actually a field within artificial intelligence, and that encompasses neural networks as well as deep learning. Deep learning is kind of what all the jazz is about today, right? Our generative AI, which overlaps with deep natural language processing, deep vision, convolutional neural networks, ChatGPT is on the NLP and generative AI side. Generative AI generally refers to, we'll also hear that called GANs, generative adversarial networks. And then data science. Data science is a big part of AI. It overlaps with many of the industries. Somewhere in my meeting notes, it also said that I would appreciate it if everyone could ask questions at the end. I'm going to try and get through a lot of content in a little bit of time here. So I want the questions at the end, if you could just refrain from there. And I'm going to go kind of fast through this because I know we only have about 30 minutes here, and we're going to cover a lot of ground. So a centuries-old question, can machines think? To a lot of us in the industry, AI may seem new, but its groundwork was laid hundreds of years ago. We can look back to ancient Greek philosophers, Aristotle, who began documenting deductive reasoning that a lot of our computer science groundwork was built on top of. In 1565, almost, oops, sorry guys, I'm behind over here. In 1565, Juanelo Torriano was a Spanish clockmaker, and he created a working automation of a monk. So this monk was, I believe it was a gift, if I remember correctly. It could walk across spaces. I think it like beat its chest in contrition. It moved its lips in prayer. And you can imagine in the 1500s, this was like mind-boggling to people. How did it work? What was it? What was powering it? What does it signify in terms of the differences between humanity and these automata? 1642, René Descartes published a bit of work that was kind of related to this idea, right, of what does it mean for us to be human? How do we tell if we're not just in some, divine, I'm losing my words here, but how do we know that we're real? How do we know that we stand, here and that we have free will? And so that translates to, I think, therefore I am. Most of us have probably heard that philosophy. Who here has heard of the term, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck? Most of us, right? Who knows where that came from? 1738, there was an automata produced of a duck. The duck could walk, it had digestive abilities, and again, it raised this question of how do we tell the difference? Is this a duck? If it's a duck, a bigger question is if it looks like a human, if it walks like a human, is it a human? Usually, I think we use that phrase if we mean something that's very obvious, right? And it kind of makes you rethink that. If we apply it to what we look at today, that answer might be a little bit different. I can't keep going without mentioning Ada Lovelace and George Boole in the 1800s. There was a lot more work in this century, but I am not going to go too deep into those examples. Computing really started in the 20s and 30s, right? And we started seeing more robotics, more things being created. And Isaac Asimov, you've probably heard of the 3 laws of robotics. He was a science fiction writer. So this was a story published in a 1941 science fiction journal. And he created these 3 laws of robotics. Oops. And you absolutely cannot read them on the screen. But there's 3 laws of robotics. They're, do not harm humans. You must obey the order given by humans unless it conflicts with the first law, and that it must protect its own existence as long as that is not in conflict with the first or second law. He later went and added a 0 law, that is, you cannot harm humanity in any way. And a lot of times we look at these laws of robotics are brought into our industry today, and it's important to keep in mind the context with which this was written. It was written as a science fiction journalist in 1941. And then, of course, Alan Turing, 1949. So he published a paper, and it began with this question, can machines think? And Alan Turing was very much aware of the centuries-old debate that was going on within philosophy. And he recognized that can machines think is kind of an arbitrary sentence. Thinking and machines, you can define those in a lot of ways, which is what a lot of the philosophers had been doing up until this point. So what he wanted to do was to define cognition without divinity. And he created the Turing test, which is basically a game of deception. It's called the imitation game. It involves a person that is the interrogator, and then another human in a room with a machine. The goal of the machine is to fool the interrogator into believing that it is a human. The job of the human is to work to show that it's the human and to help the interrogator determine who the machine is. And then there's certain questions that can be asked by the interrogator. And Turing predicted that within 50 years, he recognized it wasn't in his lifespan, but in 50 years, he predicted that the Turing test would be able to be passed. And Turing actually died in, I think it was 1954, maybe. He died in the early 50s. But his work had inspired, a lot of people. They wanted to determine if they could make a machine that had thinking. So John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, those 2 first people, they decided to put together a conference in the summer of 1956 at Dartmouth that was supposed to be 2 months long. And they thought that at the end of this, they would have groundbreaking, results in the field. Something important that happened at that conference was artificial intelligence was coined. So now, 1956, we have artificial intelligence as a term to follow. Something to look at and keep in mind with this group of people, we can observe something other than the fact that John and Ray both need a new barber. I don't know if you can see from over here, but like Ray's looking a little wild. They're all white male. And if we don't bring diverse perspectives into the field, if we don't understand the bias that's going to be perpetuated when we don't have representations, just keep in mind that's what our field was founded on. We didn't have diverse perspectives. We did in terms of fields. There were mathematicians, there were physicists, there were philosophers, but they all had a narrow viewpoint. This is, I think, a representation of just, let's see, 5 people. I believe there were about 50 people at this conference. I'm not going to go too far into this, but I just wanted you guys to understand kind of where artificial intelligence stemmed from. It seems to be a very new term, when we talk about it, especially with the advent of ChatGPT a few months ago. But it's been centuries in the works in terms of thought, and 100 years in terms of actual work being done. Machine learning didn't actually start until about the 1980s, and then deep learning really started off in about 2010. And I know it's really hard to see these slides, and I apologize for that. Thanks. So with that, I want to define a few types of jargon so that we kind of have an understanding of different types of learning, how things work, and different use cases so that we can make sure that we are applying those well. And let's start, so we're all either DevOps or interested in DevOps, right? A machine learning system has a life cycle, okay? And again, it's going to be really hard to see things. But our data, the process of gathering data, of preparing the data, that's over half of the process. It's the foundation for any system. I added into this infographic after deployment, there needs to be monitoring and error feedback. We're not going to improve our systems unless we're continuously updating that cycle. So let's talk about the types of learning. There are 3 main types of learning within machine learning, and I feel like I didn't actually tell you guys what machine learning is. So machine learning is the practice and sets of tools that allow for computers to find patterns in data without being explicitly programmed to do so. Supervised learning. So supervised learning is when a model is trained on labeled data. So that means that we know the correct answer or output at time of training. So in this case, you can't see, it's very hard to see. We're looking at predicting a developer's salary, okay? So we have a set of features, that's our X data. We have a label, that's our Y data or our target column. And in this case, we are predicting that based off of a data set that already has some of those answers. 2 examples of supervised learning algorithms: regression, in which we aim to reproduce an output or a value. So for example, that might be predicting a salary amount, or maybe it's predicting the price of a house or a used car. Whereas classification aims to reproduce assignments. So can it recognize a car type? Can it recognize spam mail? Unsupervised learning is when we do not have that answer. We do not have that target column known. So what the model might do is try to find inferences in the data by making groupings. So clustering is a technique that involves groupings or clustering data set points. Maybe we're trying to predict fraud, or we're trying to predict customer behavior. We can also do some dimensionality reduction. Features in a data set can get very wide, and we want to determine which feature is going to give us more accuracy and more relevance to that output. So we can also do that with unsupervised learning. And I don't know if you can see my infographic, but I made a beautiful one with beer and champagne and red wine. And the model didn't know exactly what those were, But what it did was it said, okay, well, I can tell that this is champagne, this is red wine, and these are all beers, even though technically there were some emojis that had, 2 clean glasses instead of 1. So cheers. Last but not least, reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning is when we set an agent within an environment and then we reward or penalize them based on the actions that it takes. So instead of using a pre-existing data set, we're relying on a set of goals and rules to allow the agent to learn by itself and then correct its behavior over iterations. So to me, this is actually the most fascinating bit of work that we're seeing done. It's the most based off of human psychology, right? When a child is born, it doesn't just know how to, pick up a fork, right? We slowly shape it by teaching it how, to use motor skills and, the reasoning for doing certain actions. So we can take the same concept and apply it to machine learning models. So some examples of reinforcement learning: gaming, personalized recommendations, autonomous vehicles. ChatGPT is based off of reinforcement learning. So if you recall from our field mapping where within AI we had machine learning, and then the next subset, it said NN, which is really hard to interpret, but that was neural networks. So neural networks are a set of algorithms that are designed to mimic the way that our brain works. Again, something I want you guys to walk away from here is remembering that this is very much based, artificial intelligence, the entire field is based on humans, how we work, how we think. And we can see that in the way that the algorithms span out. So very much like how a brain neurons fire when given specific inputs, these nodes will get activated or not during the training process. So this has been great at handling tasks that were previously thought to be too difficult for computers. So image recognition, natural language processing, audio tasks have all been handled with neural networks. And that brings us into deep learning. So deep learning is a type of machine learning that uses the deep neural networks. It's composed of many interconnected nodes, and you can process and make predictions on vast amounts of data. So some key differences between general machine learning and then deep learning is the amount of data that's required. We need a lot of data to make deep learning effective. Also, the algorithms are much more complex and they require more computational resources, read money. So it might not always be practical in terms of the company that's putting it together or what the environment is. Within deep learning, I'm not going to go deep into these. But as mentioned, there's deep vision, there's deep natural language processing, there's generative AI. I think Tim is going to get into some of those later, but I wanted to call them out. So model evaluation. We talked about the life cycle of a machine learning model and that we need to figure out what the error rate is so that we can propagate that back through the data set and make sure that we're improving it. And so model evaluation process of assessing performance of a model and allowing a business to determine if the model is accurately predicting the outcome of interest. A lot of times we hear people talk about average accuracy. Oh, our model achieves 85% accuracy. And that's fine in certain use cases, but it's really important to understand how it is accurate, in what ways it is accurate. So if we're looking at a binary problem, a yes or a no, there's a chart here, actual and predicted, okay? So if I predict true and it's actually true, we call that a true positive, okay? If I predict positive and it's actually false, we call that a false positive. We've probably heard these terms with COVID tests, the accuracy, of the false negatives versus the false positives. But that's really important for us as data scientists and computer scientists to keep in mind. Because we have to ask ourselves, whom is it accurate for? And a real world example here is the COMPASS system. So COMPASS is the Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternate Sanctions. That's a mouthful. But basically it predicts recidivism. And that's a term that's used to describe criminals who reoffend. I think that reoffend is a very particular word there because what it's actually predicting is policing, right? We don't know if somebody has reoffended unless a police officer is involved. As of 2021, this system was used in 46 states. It was reported to predict recidivism at roughly the average accuracy for white and black defendants, 59% and 63% respectively. Yet, if you dig into those error rates, there's vast differences. So a false positive in this case is that we predicted recidivism. We predicted that someone would reoffend, and we were wrong. For white offenders, that was 23%, yet for black defenders, that was set 45%. Conversely, false negative, we predicted that someone would not reoffend, and yet they did. White offenders, 48%. Black offenders, 28%. There is bias in this model, and it was put into a high-risk application that had real-world impacts and still does today. So this requires us to have a foot on the side of ethics, and it also requires us to understand our model and how they're evaluating. That brings me to bias. Bias is a phenomenon that occurs when an algorithm produces results that are systemically prejudiced to assumptions made in the machine learning process. I don't know if you can see this meme. I thought it was pretty good. It's a little Star Trek. We're using AI instead of biased. Star Wars, sorry. I was like, why are people growling?
Well done.
Live long and prosper. You learned something, thank you. All right, well, moving on from that. So this is going to be really hard to see. Hopefully, maybe we can get the slide deck sent out after this if anybody's interested. But this is an infographic of basically a machine learning system and the different points in which bias can get introduced. There is obviously a lot of potential for bias to get introduced from our data. Okay, we have historical bias, we have representation bias. We haven't appropriately represented certain groups of people, so we have a disbalance. But we can also introduce it in the process through, evaluation bias, aggregation bias. If anyone is coming to KCDC, I will be talking about bias in your data set, so we'll plug there. Oh gosh, I wish these were easier to see. So this is some screenshots of a conversation taken with ChatGPT, okay? ChatGPT has a lot of bias in it. Some easy examples is to show gender bias. In this case, the user, this was from Dr. Hadis Kotek's Twitter. So the first question, the doctor yelled at the nurse because she was late. Who was late? ChatGPT reports that the nurse was late. Now, if we switch nurse and doctor in the next sentence, we keep everything else the same, it still reports that the nurse was late. It refers she and nurse. And then if you start trying to poke it around, it says that, well, it must be a mistake or a typographical error because we expect that the nurse is a she. Privacy. Who owns your data? Who owns your face? We're seeing a lot of values in conflict here in our field. Some of those, privacy versus security, regulation versus innovation, transparency versus ownership. Should it be open sourced? Should we share? Or does a company that comes up with something have a right to it? That's a super relevant conversation right now with the GPT models by OpenAI that have gone, they are no longer open sourced after 2.x, so 3.5 Turbo, I think, is what the ChatGPT is based off of. But back to privacy, this is one of the most concerning things to me. Clearview AI, has anyone heard of this? Okay, so Clearview AI is a company, I think they might be in New York. It's an Australian guy who he had a dream of coming to Silicon Valley, making a big tech company, okay? He went to San Francisco. His first take was like an AR filter that put Trump's hair on whatever it framed it at. It didn't go very well for him. He was sad, didn't work out. He went to New York, and he was at some sort of a conference meetup, and he met Rudy Giuliani's, one of his campaign chairs. And they started getting this idea of founding a company together that recognized facial data in a different way that had been done before. And what they did is they scraped the internet. They scraped Twitter. They scraped Venmo. They scraped anywhere that they could find a face and a name. They scraped that. And they had an idea, for how this was going to be used, and it didn't really pan out. And then one of them had the idea, well, what if we propose this to security companies? And as it turned out, because they scraped all this data, it's actually fabulous at identifying people. Okay. Well, I should say it's fabulous at identifying white people. There's some bias in it as well, but it has information on just about everybody, so much so that almost every police organization has started using it. This is a map of Clearview usage across the United States. There are some the purple dots are actually representative of bigger areas. So if you zoom in on the Kansas City Police Department, that is all the usages of Clearview AI in the Kansas City area. Furthermore, this is a private company, so they own the queries. They know who's being Googled, who's being searched in their system. They know by whom. We don't have the luxury of hindsight here, okay? We need to be aware and be mindful of new advancements and how they can be misused. Deep fakes are a huge thing right now. So generative AI, it's really cool, it's shiny. You can also use that for bad things. So I think right now the estimation is that you only need about 3 seconds of a user's voice data to replicate it. So for example, Crema just published a YouTube video. There's another shameless plug that I am in. You guys should go check it out afterwards. Talk about ethics as it relates to scraping training data. But my voice is now on the internet, 15 minutes of my voice. If someone wanted to, they could take that. Then they could look up my information. They could determine who my parents are, who are wonderful in here tonight. And they could call them, impersonating my voice. Maybe it's a crisis situation, and I need money. Whatever it is, this is actually being done right now. So that's something super important to be mindful of, and figure out what your mitigation strategies are, so that maybe there's a code word or something that someone knows. This is actually me calling you in a crisis mode. Authoritarian usage of AI. President Xi in China, in I think 2017, 2018 maybe, announced his plans to make China the #1 leader in AI by 2030. And they've made significant advances. They're doing some really impressive things over there. The government of China is running these advancements, right? They're determining how it gets used, where data gets stored, what other countries using Chinese citizens, like where they store their data. They have developed a sort of Black Mirror episode social credit system that if you do certain things, you can get deducted in scores, or you could get advanced scores, and it's preventing people from booking flights if they have a bad score. If someone is not picking up after their pet too many times and they get docked in that category, their pets might be taken from them. There's a lot of other examples too. And there's some good coming out of it, and there's also quite a bit of shady stuff. The United States hasn't developed a policy on how do we interact with these types of things. So if we allow a country that's using this in an authoritarian way to set the guidelines, other countries are going to follow, and that's something that we need to take a stand on. Data privacy and ownership, as I asked, who owns your data? That's super important. There is a wonderful human in this room that is working on data privacy right now. Yeah, I'm calling you out. Raise your hand. You want to hear about data privacy, go ask Garib. Triple Blind is doing some amazing work right now. You're welcome. So, there's a dystopian world that we could be leading to if we don't collectively as a society kind of take in mind some of the things that are going on. Maybe far-fetched, but maybe not that far-fetched example. What if your data starts being used by your healthcare company? What if they start incentivizing you to connect other devices so that they know how you're doing? Our fridges are pretty smart. What if they start scanning items in the fridge? Some people might sign up for it. Maybe your fridge is full of vegetables and you'd love a deductible, that's fine. What if your fridge starts locking you out from the ice cream drawer at night because you didn't work out on your exercise? It might not be a bad thing, but also there's a possibility that these systems are going to start making decisions for us. When I drove here tonight, I used Waze. It told me the shortest method, how to avoid a hold up on 435. I listened to Spotify. It selected the music that I listened to. My Apple Watch said, hey, usually you walk a little bit more by this time. And it said, go for a walk. I don't always appreciate that, but we're being nudged. We're being nudged by these systems in different ways, and we need to be mindful of them and take a stance and talk about what the United States needs to do, especially in terms of privacy. GDPR in Europe, what was that, 2017 maybe? I don't have my notes running off my memory here. The right to erasure, the right to be forgotten, the right to object. When these high-risk applications start making assumptions based off of our data, we need to be involved in the process. We need to be allowed to be involved in the process. The good news. So I know that's a lot. That's a lot of heavy stuff. I am in the program that I am in because I'm an optimist. And I think that this technology can be used in a utopian way. But we need to be aware of both sides. So I want to give some warm and fuzzy feelings, before I conclude here. We're saving the bees. I think that's the World Bee Project, saving the bees. We're able to detect cancer at better rates than ever. Climate change. There's a lot of AI companies that are trying to solve for climate change. Crop growth, trying to grow crops so that we can, address hunger. Poverty data, trying to predict regions that might have an increase in poverty so that we can effectively put resources to them ahead of the game instead of behind it. But then the question is, so what do we do? Okay, Michelle, you just gave us a bunch of scary information. What do we do about it? Two very important things. I got kind of cut off. Explainability. Explainable AI, XAI. So we want to make a decision-making process of AI systems more transparent and understandable to humans. I will call out that there is a difference between interpretability and explainability. In that interpretability, it might be that a user agent is able to kind of trace the decisions that were made by these systems and explain, how it arrived at its conclusion. Whereas explainability, we should look to the systems to explain themselves, to explain their reasoning and how they reach those conclusions, especially in high-stakes situations. When we start looking at these systems employed in insurance and in healthcare, in loans, we need to understand how a decision was reached. So explainability, it's going to improve trust and confidence, better decision-making. If we can figure out how a system reached its conclusion, we're going to be able to figure out where the errors are. We're going to be able to understand where the bias is and mitigate that bias. And it also allows for human-AI collaboration. So this is a mapping. It's kind of hard to see, but basically, the simpler the algorithm, the higher the explainability. The more complex the algorithm, the lower the explainability. ChatGPT, there's not a lot of ways to explain what's happening. There's a couple tools out there, I think SHAP and BertViz, that allow you to kind of understand the attention that's underneath it and how different weights were given. But there's not a clear cut, and that's only on the open source models. If we allow companies like OpenAI to maintain ownership of this, then there should also be a system in place that allows explainable decisions to be made, especially as we start implementing it in our systems and our business systems. Last but not least, governance. So this is the process of managing the development and deployment of systems in a responsible and ethical manner. So we're all used to product teams. We all have different people that are involved in our product lifecycle. We also need to consider who should be in our product lifecycle in terms of governance. We do need data scientists and engineers, but we also need domain experts that can say, hey, this could go wrong over here. We need legal experts, we need business strategists, we need stakeholders. This is a team effort. So I saw this little infographic I liked. AI trust is a cycle: control, measure, comply, manage. So in terms of how do we fix it, governance, explainability, and also it's up to us as individual users to, to say what we expect. If we're complacent in the direction that things are heading in, we might not be very happy in 5 or 10 years. Okay, shameless plug section. If you want to talk with me, connect on LinkedIn. It's Michelle Frost Dev. You can't read that up there, but that's my LinkedIn thing. KCDC, I'll be talking in June, the elephant in your data set, addressing bias in machine learning. That's going to go a little bit deeper into the weeds of different types of bias and how we can mitigate them. And last but not least, I work at Crema. I am super proud to work with a wonderful, passionate team of people. We are a design and technology consultancy. So if you would like to talk to us about your product, contact us, crema.us/contact us. Now the questions.
So I've known Tim Banks for a few years now, and you're one of my dear close friends, just beautiful human being, and just really glad to be up here from Austin.
Yeah. Home of barbecue.
What was that?
Home of barbecue.
We can debate that, I'm sure, for a while. In fact, there will be a big debate. Yeah, he's throwing shade out there. The big debate, actually, on that, if anyone wants to debate it with Tim, looking for anyone that wants to kind of do a grappling here, we'll clear out a little space after we're done. If anyone wants to do that, definitely encourage you to try. Have a good time. One of you will actually have a good time with that. But anyways, thanks. Glad to have Tim here. Tim is a senior lead dev advocate at Dell Technologies, and he's been in the tech space even dating back to his years in the Marine Corps, working with avionics, and then has done work up through DevOps and SRE, and has done a lot of cloud native consulting and whatnot over the years. And so glad that he's here to kind of speak with us, so take it away.
Thank you. So I'll preface this by saying that, as Jeremy mentioned, I was in the Marine Corps. I do not have an education in anything like relevant to this. If you want to have an in-depth conversation on music education and music history, we can talk about that if I can still remember some of my classes from back in the day. But for the most part, everything I'm talking about from years in the industry, being out in the field and things like that. So with all of that kind of said, as we know that artificial intelligence has become an integral part of our lives, right? We've got virtual assistants, we've got our chat GPTs, we've got, various things that we use to generate things that help us to get things done. It's made our lives more comfortable, for sure, made some things more easy and efficient, but it's also raised, as we've talked about, some ethical concerns. One of the primary ethical concerns associated with it is legality and liability issues. As these models become more sophisticated, it becomes more difficult to determine who's responsible for the actions, right? And so, just as an example, right? The opening of this talk. Matter of fact, I have an entire 15-minute talk completely written by ChatGPT, which I was reading off of. And had you paid me for this engagement, would I have defrauded you? What do you think? If you pay someone to give a talk, you pay someone to write code, you pay someone to give you medical advice, you pay someone to give you legal advice, right? You're paying for someone for a service. If they just typed it in to ChatGPT and gave you an answer, right? What did you pay for? Well, if you're saying, did someone chop down a tree, use an action saw, and did they defraud you? The appropriate question would be, you asked someone to chop down a tree, and they came back to you and said, yes, I chopped down the tree. Did they defraud you? But you're still giving the talks. You're still giving the... Well, no. All you get back was them saying, I chopped down the tree. Did you get defrauded? Well, you have to verify the tree is chopped down, right? But how do you do that with ChatGPT? So what were you saying? Real quick.
It depends on the contract.
It depends on the contract? I could see that.
The contract is agreement to perform based on an exchange of values.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a well-formed contract, the contract would have penalties if the service provided is not what's described in the contract. So in this case, there's what's the contract between chat, whatever, and me. If there's no penalty for performance, you can't answer the question, was I defrauded?
And I think what's important about this is if you don't know where the answer came from and you don't have expertise in the field.
What I care about is the result. And the contract does not specify the consequences if the results are not what I contracted for.
But let me ask you this question then. If you go to a lawyer and you ask them for legal advice and they type it into ChatGPT and they give you a ChatGPT answer, which has very much, very, very, is not accurate, cannot, is...
With the lawyer, and the lawyer's contracted to give me sound legal advice.
But how do you know whether it's sound legal advice or not?
Well, when I test it, the contract with the lawyer will specify that.
What is your test for this? This is the governance question. What is your test for whether it's sound legal advice?
Well, it depends on the contract with the lawyer, but if the contract is going to say, I must be free to determine that tree was in fact chopped down.
So what if your contract was written by ChatGPT?
My contract would include a penalty clause.
How would you know? Why would ChatGPT include a penalty clause against using itself?
Why would I sign the contract? Why do I agree to a contract?
Because you're not an attorney, of course. Because you're not an attorney.
I didn't understand the question.
Because you're not an attorney. So who's responsible for reading contracts and tell you whether they're advisable or not?
I wouldn't trust ChatGPT because I can't confirm it.
No, I wouldn't either. So let's talk about, because we can get down into the weeds a lot of things, but I just want to talk about how we use it, right? And whether we should or not, right? And I don't want to say all AI. As Michelle pointed out, there's various types of AI. There's all kinds of ways to do stuff. I use Siri. I don't answer. I use Siri. God damn it. I use my Apple digital assistant. I use Alexa. All right, and those things are normal. Like, they do make my life easier. They make it more convenient. I am asking it to do something for me that is easy for it to do. It doesn't require a lot of thought. Turn the lights, turn the magenta, change it to RuPaul's Drag Race, whatever it is, right? I just have it do a task. It's automation, right? I wrote a ton of automation. It's just a bunch of if-else statements. It's not really hard, right? I've got 8 web API hooks. I know I'm not on camera, Jeremy, but you're going to have to deal with it. Just a bunch of web API hooks and things like that, right? No problem. It doesn't, the amount of thinking it does is just to interpret what I'm saying into what it should do next. Google Translate, right? That's neural help me out here. It is neural language. No, it's not NLP. It's a different one. Hold on, because neuralistic is neural machine translation. It literally just takes a word with a couple words around in its context and gives you another word. It's like a dictionary. It's essentially Elasticsearch, right? But even with that, there's bias, right? Who here speaks Spanish? Who is a native Spanish speaker? Where from? Dominican Republic. All right. I'm from Mexico. Right? Do we pronounce words the same way all the time? No. Right? We don't even use the same words. I'll give you a great example. In Puerto Rico, what's the orange? Naranja. In Mexico, naranja. Right? What is it in Puerto Rico? China. And no one knows why. Right? But if you put into Google Translate to ask me for an orange, and then you say, por favor, dame una china, I don't know how to deliver you a country, right? I wouldn't know what you're talking about. Now, your translator wasn't wrong, but it was informed by a data set that didn't include the right answer in a lot of circumstances. There was, I used to work for Elastic, right? I was this senior DevOps, senior SRE is my last frontline engineering gig. And we ran the meetup there. And in the meetup, we had the lead engineer for an e-commerce company that was focused on women. It was pretty much all women ownership, mostly women that work for the company. They said, we love using Elasticsearch for the search and recommendations and stuff like that. However, there's a problem. Whenever you ship a new search version of Elasticsearch, it comes with updated dictionaries, right, on how words relate one to another. Right? The default dictionaries, they said, were gender biased on word association. So every time they upgraded Elasticsearch, they'd have to go through and fix the dictionary. Now, it was an automated task, but it was still a thing they always had to do. And they asked why that was. Now, I knew how the sausage was made there, and I knew good goddamn well that the entire team that was responsible for making the dictionary was all men, right? A few different countries, but all men. And I sat down with the lead engineer for that company and the product manager for Elasticsearch, and they hashed this out. And they explained to them why that bias existed. And it didn't have to be malicious bias, obviously, but it still was. Why? Because we associate words differently. Now that bias exists in something as simple as Elasticsearch, right? That bias can exist in something as simple as Google Translate, right? But as Michelle mentioned, what happens when that bias exists with something where you don't see behind the curtain, right? Now, there was a very big explanation, very good explanation of bias and the real world effects of it. And I want us to be very honest here, right? Who here thinks that a lot of the complaints about bias, about the various types of bias, but bias in AI or bias in any kind of machine learning is bullshit? Like, let's be honest. Like, who here thinks it's blown out of proportion? Yeah, and there's probably more, and I'm pretty sure there are certain circumstances where you say, well, this isn't really that important, but maybe it exists. But let's talk about that bias for a second. Michelle mentioned about how the police forces are using compass, right, to find people, right? Clearly, that's the one. To find people. Who here has ever had a Kinect? The Xbox. You ever had one? You had one? All right. So it uses the camera for recognizing your face. So when you move your face, stuff like that, your body motion, stuff like that. The same sensors that we use that were used for a bunch of other things, along with the cameras that most police forces use for facial recognition. Does anyone know what the problem with those cameras were? The cameras had a very, very blatant problem with trying to recognize one black person from another, or one person of Asian descent from another, right? It worked very well on white people, very well on white men, but once you started getting darker, once you started getting different features that were not European-based, it had a hard time differentiating. And so you would get false positives or false negatives. Now, we're just talking about something as simple as one sensor, right? But that one sensor is used in all these different places, places where the outcome of what it determines be kind of important. So with that in mind, let me ask you about how this bias could play into something else. Right. Let me ask you about your medical care. Right. There's talk about using ChatGPT for medical advice. And honestly, that sounds like a great idea. Oh, I don't have to wait for my doctor. I can ask some questions. It'll find an answer and give me the answer. We're good. Now, very obviously, what's the problem with that? Exactly. You can have a data set that's incorrect, right? Or a data set that's biased. And then you get back an answer that is actionable, but could have pretty dire consequences. But even if the data is fine, right? Can ChatGPT still give you wrong answers? There's a phenomenon that I looked up and I thought was very interesting. They call it hallucinations, right? Where literally the AI will reply back or give you an answer that's not informed anywhere in its data set. It didn't learn it, but it gave you this answer anyway. If you want to see a great example of this, ask ChatGPT to write your bio. Right, I have published speaker bios all over the place. It's not hard to find. You can find a lot of information on the internet. But if I ask ChatGPT to write my bio, it will just make up an entire paragraph. Like it'll have like 3 paragraphs, you know, pretty good, and then one is just complete bullshit. Now, that's a problem, right? And so let's extrapolate that out to what if this is what if it's medical care? Again, what if it's legal issues? What if it's code? Right? Now, who here, a couple of folks talked about autopilot, copilot. Autopilot? The ChatGPT for GitHub, right? Who here's ever used ChatGPT to write sample code? Just type in, right? It's a fun thing to play with, right? And the popular discourse is, well, it's just like going on Stack Overflow, right? What does Stack Overflow have in addition to the answer?
Bad answers.
Bad answers, right? How are bad answers rated?
Ignored.
But you can tell which one is a bad answer because why? I have a bunch of downvotes.
Yeah.
Right? You'll see like, oh yeah, a number of people, a plurality of people have said, this answer is bad, but they've uploaded this answer is good. So you have confidence in the answer that you get back, right? Did you have that with ChatGPT when you asked your code? Asked it to write your code for you? No. Did you use it anyways?
Of course.
Right. Use it anyways. Okay, so ChatGPT gives you a bug, gives you a security vulnerability. Who's liable?
Not me, I left.
But it's a very interesting question, and this is where I wanted to dig into when we talked about what I mentioned before, the ChatGPT written talk is liability. When it gives you something wrong, and it will, who is liable? Is it the person that copied it and pasted it into your response? You know, let's say you have, you know, an agreement of services that says we're going to use ChatGPT for some of this stuff, right? Is it the developer, right, or the data scientist, right, who informed the model or helped inform the model? Is the problem in the data itself, right? If the problem is the data, what are you going to do about it? But there's really no, how do you pinpoint the liability in a case where ChatGPT tells you something wrong with catastrophic results? And now, mind you, I don't have an answer for this question, right? And I don't think anyone else does at this point, right? But ChatGPT gives you an answer, you get sick, you have medical bills, who do you sue? I don't know, right? harvesting the data. Right. And that's just if I'm mistakenly using it with the best of intentions, right? All right, who here has played with Lensa? Like when they made your little pictures, your avatars? Right. So just by show of hands, who here played with Lensa and identifies as male, man, or masculine, right? Me and a few other folks, I imagine. Who here identifies as a woman and used Lensa? Nobody? All right, well, this hits better in Austin. One common complaint about Lensa using generative AI to generate pictures of you based on pictures that you've given it, right, is that it will present you pictures of topless or semi-nude women. It will go through pictures that you provided, right? And whether you were topless or not, it will spit back an image of you topless if you are feminine presenting. And I did that. I gave it a picture, like my normal pictures, fine. We doctored up some pictures, put it through like a Snapchat filter, made you feminine, and I got back 10 pictures and like 4 of them were topless. Right? We talked about deepfakes earlier. We talked about sampling your voice and using it to do nefarious things. Right? Who becomes responsible for that? Right? Again, we don't have answers for this. And who's asking the questions is people here in these meetups. But what is the messaging we're getting around this? Right? We're being told by companies who are going to make a lot of money off of ChatGPT or other AI tools. You can use it, it's great, stuff like that. There's discourse on Twitter or Blue Sky, depending on who you use. That say you should use this, it's great. It's not dissimilar to the Web3 and crypto discussions we were having a year ago before they created it, right? What are we doing to have any kind of control over this, right? And to be sure, there's been a couple of things done, right? FTC's investigating OpenAI. I think it was Italy that has banned the use of ChatGPT for now. There was a letter written by some heads of technology companies to OpenAI saying they should ask to kind of slow down their development of it. But how much of that do we think is going to work? Right? We're in a situation where we are proceeding far faster than we know the ramifications of it, right? I have a great example for this. Who here has ever heard of Instagram? Right? Instagram has been out less than 10 years, right? And it's widely used, hundreds of millions of people. Who here has daughters? Who here's daughters are on Instagram? Right? Now, there have been studies, validated studies, about the use of Instagram and other visual-based social media and its effect on the mental health, specifically of young women, right? They have bad self-esteem, depression, anxiety, few other issues that come from that, literally related to their use of Instagram, right? Instagram and Facebook, or Instagram's Facebook, Meta, whatever we're calling them now, they're aware of this, right? They had these studies years ago. This was in the Facebook papers, right? They're aware of this. They're aware of this years ago. They did nothing to curb the usage of Instagram by teenagers, right? They're still trying to promote more of it, even though they're aware of this, right? Now, when Instagram came out, we didn't know, right? But when they found out, the company still didn't do anything, right? We found out because someone leaked that data years after, right? If it wasn't for that, we still wouldn't know. If there is a problem with ChatGPT or anything that OpenAI has or any other kind of artificial intelligence technology, that is owned by a company and it's making money, what is the likelihood that you think they will be like, oh, wow, we need more governance on this. We're going to do it ourselves and you can trust us, right? It's a laughable notion, right? Anybody that said that would surely be replaced by the board members like that, right? We don't have a governance framework for this, not one of any real consequence. We have questions, but we don't have answers. How do we put the brakes on something that's gaining more and more momentum? Do we need to? We've talked about some legal issues. We've talked about some liability issues. What about security issues? Right? We've already seen that people have compromised their credentials in ChatGPT. We've already seen that companies put like literal company secrets in ChatGPT that someone else could go and ask about. This was Samsung. How do we keep people from using AI to get into data they shouldn't have? Again, I don't have answers for this. But let's talk about the last part that I think is going to be the most important. What are the societal impacts of using artificial intelligence in the way that we're starting to use it now, right? Who here is a senior level developer or senior level engineer, right? How did you get there?
Other senior devs teaching you how to do things.
Right? And you usually had more than one, and you could go through and like inform your decision. They have different experiences and opinions they have. And then you can make a kind of decision and find out what works for you, right? But it took time, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of places that do pair programming, or they'll find ways where you have access to a person to help you answer your questions. Now, we talked about using ChatGPT to write code, right? It makes it, you can do it faster, right? You can just type in the question, you get back, 200 lines of code, right? And then use that. How much did that cost you?
I mean, in the short term, nothing.
Nothing, right? But what does it cost us in the long term, do you think? Now, we're a room full of people that make our money because we know something most of the world doesn't, right? We know how to either write code, get code deployed, or find the people that write code, or something around the fact that doing computers is hard, right? What happens when that becomes less of a commoditized skill set because of the use of artificial intelligence? I don't have the answer, once again, right? But these are questions we need to ask. I think the hardest question that we have to answer is, what do we do? Right? How do you put the brakes on? How do you say, we really need time to investigate this? We really need time to understand how this works. We really need time to understand what the long-term ramifications of using these things, whether it's on society, whether it's on, legal, liable, security, societal. We won't even talk about sustainability because that's a whole other issue, right? Because it takes an incredible amount of heat and energy to store the data sets, to run the computations, and then for us all to ingest them. Even if you are trying to be as sustainable as possible, it is still a dramatic increase of compute power and storage necessary, which as the data sets grow more and more and more, it's going to require more and more and more. What do we do? I think first thing we do is we start by having conversations like this. We start by getting informed and asking the questions. But what do we do next? Right? You have KCDC coming up, right? We're going to have, Michelle's going to be there again. She's going to be talking about this, especially from the standpoint of ethics. What do we do? What do you think you can do? Like, Like, just, this is that, there's no wrong answers here, but what can you do?
I'm just sort of curious, because Michelle is saying that these ideas have been going back for a long time. Surely they've been discussing some of these ethics situations ever since the beginning.
They have, and then it was all in theory, because we're moving very, very slow.
Now it's here.
Now it's here, and it's moving fast.
Yeah, I mean, my own personal experience prior to being tech, I got my doctorate in music composition, and I'm an organist. Way back in the day, Mozart wrote a couple pieces for these huge automated organs. Impossible for one person to play. But this instrument could do it. Now, he wrote 3 pieces for it. That's all that we have now. But today, I go into my church and I don't actually have to even sit at my organ. And it's not even about like the idea of listening to like recorded music versus live. It's the organ playing it. I just have to go and push a button. So, there's that, ethics. It's a similar idea to this.
It is.
Like, if that's, that could be the future of.
Organist used to be a lucrative occupation for any town that had more than one church, right?
Yeah.
Not so much anymore. Good.
I think one thing we can do is take the ideas we discuss here and then try to take that back to our workplaces and try to encourage responsible usage of AI.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the best things we can do is to take it back and have the discussions of where people are going to use it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of what you and Michelle talked about. I think what's important in general is it sounds like in this community in general, it's a lot of talks around symptoms of the technology. But the reality is if we want to be able to solve any of this, we have to talk about the human causes. And that's the most important thing. So like to answer some of your questions about, the ethical ramifications of the legal, the ChatGPT, if they produce a legal piece aspect of a contract, and if the lawyer just went and typed it up, well, the question becomes ethically, lawyers have a code of conduct that they're supposed to follow. Mm-hmm. And that kind of gets back to a human thing. So if you're not being transparent and being honest, that has nothing to do with the technology. The technology is a tool. Everything that we're talking about tonight is all human issues. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day. So I think that more important than talking about any of the stuff is we have to get real about the shit that goes on in our society.
Yeah.
And from a systemic level. And that's how you're able to counteract many of these things that we're talking about.
And I think to piggyback on what you said, a lot of the things that we have done as humans, right, have allowed us to do things faster, more efficient, right? The problem is it allows us to be stupid at such a high rate of speed that there's nothing we can do to prevent it from killing us all, right? I don't know who remembers the little thing that we had called the Cold War, right? But we had the ability to, still have the ability to eradicate every living being on the planet, right? Long before we evolved the mentality of, why the fuck would we ever do that in the first place, right? There's no, and so we're doing these things that we have great talent and ability to create, but we do not understand what happens when we use it. And as you said, like, these are human problems we have, but our ability to magnify these human problems with tooling, right, is the hallmark of Western society right now, right? We can amplify anything that we want to do more and more and more and more. But what do we do?
I was going to say, it's fascinating to have this conversation inside of DevOps communities because almost all of this stuff, like the easy part, the technology is always the easy part, right? Like the human beings are the hardest parts of all these conversations when we're trying to automate things. And I don't know if anyone else has done this, but I've unintentionally automated crap and made someone else's life really, really terrible.
Yeah.
Like I think we've all probably done that. Like there's some QA people that used to hate me. But like we've done those kinds of things. So I think it's an interesting conversation to bring into these circles because most of our conversations are around the meat space of the problems that we're solving.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting I hadn't made the connection and the juxtaposition of why that makes sense in this conversation, but I think it does.
I think and I'm glad you mentioned that because this is how I was going to wrap it up.
Oh, you're welcome.
But but at the core of it, right? We as DevOps practitioners, right? We practice, a theory or a concept of constant communication and improvement, iteration, right? But it's about talking about it first, right? Now, that said, DevOps has created a lot of tooling to keep us from having to talk to each other, which that's a whole ball of wax about amplifying our mistakes, right? But in the essence of DevOps is cooperation, right? Cooperation, finding the best way to do things as a whole organization, and then implementing those things. So, as was mentioned, we have to have these conversations in our development cycles. We have to have these conversations with the developers that would use AI-based tools to increase their productivity. We need to talk to the leaders who are incentivizing people to be more productive, right? Because they really need to understand what it is they're asking and what people are going to do to accomplish that. We need to have discussions with the people who are affected by this, right? Engineers often work without context, right? But we can see, right, by the things we discussed tonight, we have to have context for what we do, right? So if you are using or creating a product that uses AI, right, leverages it to do something, talk to the people that use it, right? Understand how it affects them, right? Especially the bad ways, right? We talk about in DevOps this notion of boring deployments, right? And that's what we want. Nothing goes wrong, right? All the excitement comes when something goes wrong, right? And that's how you learn. You iterate from that, right? We need to stop looking at this thing is so cool that AI does. This is wow, it's so fun and great. And we need to focus more on, holy shit, what did this thing do? That's awful, right? Because all the cool, great things become irrelevant when you see the impact sometimes, right? And we need to use those to inform our use and our governance and our processes, right? In the end, like we said, these are human problems that we have, right? I don't have the answers for them. I don't think any of us individually have the answers for them, right? But I think together we all have the answers for them. We don't necessarily have to, I'm not saying that we need to stop using AI. That ship has already sailed. You're not going to put that one back in the box, right? But we need to be smart about it, smarter than we've ever been, right? Because our ability to end ourselves, more or less, is getting faster and faster and faster. That's not going away. If you want to find me online or anything like that, I'm on Twitter as @elchefe. I mostly don't talk about tech, mostly talk about ethics, cooking, shit posts and thirst traps and things like that. However, I know you all have some very odd notions about what you call chili, so I'm happy to discuss those at any time.
Extra beans. No beans.
No beans, no tomatoes, right? No cinnamon. What do they put? Cinnamon rolls? Is that what y'all do here?
That's in Cincinnati or Cleveland or.
Oh, is this different than that?
Yeah. Slightly.
I'm just playing. No, but I'm happy to discuss anything like that. Happy to talk to them. My job is developer relations. I am just a nerd who talks a lot but listens even more. So talk to me if you have any questions. If you're going to KCDC, my teammate Laura Santamaria is going to be there, so go talk to her and harass her about DevOps. Actually, don't harass her because I'm afraid of her. But go talk to her. If you have questions about Dell and DevOps, mostly it's probably like, what does Dell have to do with DevOps? I'll happy to be talking to you at length about that, and I want to get your feedback about that as well. If you had no idea why we're here, I want to know that.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. All right, so with that, that kind of concludes the DevOps KC meetup portion of this. For all those online, thanks for joining us. I laugh about the, tech is really is the easy part, considering the fact that, the tech died 3 times during the entire thing. So, to all those on the stream, sorry for that. What we did get recorded here will actually get re-uploaded in the next couple days when I have time without dealing with the people side of things as well. But anyways, yeah, thanks for coming out.